Hello and welcome to the CUFI Weekly. I'm your host, Kasim. We have to discuss Afghanistan once again. Firstly, I want to send my thoughts and prayers to the families of the 13 US service personnel who were killed in the suicide bombing at Hamid Karzai Airport. There's Marines, naval corpsmen, American soldier. We thank you for your sacrifice, and we mourn and pray for their families, and we thank them for their service to our great nation. The lack of leadership that has taken place as we have left Afghanistan has simply been horrific. The strategy to evacuate has put Americans in danger. It has put our Afghan allies in danger. It has been incoherent at best. It has been completely reckless at worst. I, in many ways, am a product, or was a product, of the post-Soviet invasion wave of jihadist euphoria which swept throughout much of the world. If you don't know what I'm referring to, the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, and by the late 80s, almost a decade in the country, they retreated. They left the country essentially in defeat. And what that did for many radical Islamists all over the world, it made them believe that they had the ability to defeat their enemies. The fight against the Soviet Union, of course, was supported by the United States and many other countries. But for the people who fought it, who came from, of course, Afghanistan, from Pakistan, from Saudi Arabia, from Yemen, from all over the world, they now saw this as we can defeat our enemies. It gave birth to, of course, Al-Qaeda, who were a product of that time. You saw propaganda videos, which I saw growing up in the UK, like Afghan Jihad, extolling the virtues of the jihadist movement and how this was just one stepping stone. That the jihadists had defeated an empire, and now essentially they could go on to defeat anyone. From the inspiration that jihadists got from beating the Soviet Union, they recruited thousands. And then you saw people popping up in places like Bosnia, in Kashmir, and many other conflicts. And now here we are, 20 years since 9/11, and we've seen this hasty, uncoordinated, incoherent retreat from the United States in Afghanistan. We've seen US personnel murdered on the last days there. We saw a rocket attack by ISIS-Khorasan on the airport. Thankfully, no one was injured or killed. What does this project? When I look at it, as somebody who loves this country, I see weakness. We are projecting an aura of weakness. We look defeated. It looks incoherent. It makes very little sense. I'm not making arguments whether America should have remained in Afghanistan or not. That's not the discussion I'm having here. This could have been done so much better and lives could have been saved. But what this is going to do, it's just going to reinforce the idea that America was defeated by the Taliban and inspired jihadist forces all over the world. You've seen it in Syria. You've seen jihadists waving flags celebrating the Taliban's victory. You've seen Hamas congratulating the Taliban. You've seen the Iranian government making statements about how, they've shook off American imperialism. America has never got into a war because it was too strong. Indeed, we've been attacked. We've had wars because people have perceived us as weak. And what does this say to our friends? What does this say to our ally Israel? Surrounded by enemies, surrounded by hostile forces. Israel has always known that America stands with Israel, that America has Israel's back. If you're looking at the events of the last month, surely there's part of you which is thinking, this is America saying that we're not always going to be there. That we won't be able to stand with you shoulder to shoulder. Not that we can't, that we won't. It makes for dismal reading. And the inspiration that jihadists are going to get from this, the inspiration that extremists are going to get from this, is going to make the world a lot less safe. If I look at the defeat of the Soviet Union and call that the first wave of extremist propaganda and emboldenment, I think this is a second wave that we're going to see, which is going to be a lot more deadlier, a lot more scary, and it's going to sadly cost a lot more lives. I really hope I'm wrong. I truly do. But what this is doing, and it's very apparent, in emboldening extremists, emboldening the very worst radicals. And as Israel stands on the front line of this, we have to hope, we have to pray that we stand with Israel against the evil that is facing down, because Israel's enemies are America's enemies. And I was having an incredible discussion with Kirby Calhoun, who's a former Green Beret. Catch that on the CUFI podcast if you haven't already, who was in Afghanistan. And he alluded to, if the people in the Taliban extremists see this as them defeating the great Satan America, they're probably feeling a lot more comfortable and emboldened to now target the little Satan Israel. Sadly, after 20 years in Afghanistan, we've not left the world safer. The world is now a lot more dangerous. I wish I could say that, it will be fine, it'll be okay, and all these things. I don't know. What I do know is that this country, the United States of America, is still an incredible country. That our servicemen and women are still the greatest soldiers in the world. And I still know that we, the people, have the power to make differences in this country, to ensure that we hold our elected officials accountable, that we stand by our allies. So, I ask you to pray for Israel, pray for the United States, pray for the families of those servicemen and women who were lost in the terror attack in Kabul. Make sure you speak out for what is right, make sure that you are getting educated, and make sure you hold our officials accountable for the decisions they make. Until next week, for Zion's sake, do not remain silent. This is Kasim for the CUFI Weekly.
Thanks for checking out today's episode of CUFI Weekly. If you enjoyed this episode and want to stay up to date with the latest news from the Middle East along with topics involving US-Israel relations, please be sure to like and subscribe. And remember to click that notification button so that you are notified every time a new show is uploaded.